Jennifer, thank you for coming by. It's so great to sit with you.
You are so welcome. What a fun journey we've had sitting here years later from the beginning of our relationship. That's exciting.
That's a great idea for a different video.
Yes.
We'll do it. So I just wanted to ask you, I consider you a thought leader in Birmingham, and just love anything you have to share. So I wanted to ask you, in terms of just the market in general, maybe first question, what have you observed over the last year or two, maybe like a longer span? And then what are you observing most recently?
Sure. It's a timely question because yesterday, as a matter of fact, I just did our monthly statistical overview of the market. And when we do that process, I'm looking year over year and month over month to see what did 2023 look like, what does 2024 look like. And it was incredibly revealing because what we discovered is essentially 2023, without breaking down all the data, which I'm happy to do if you want me to, but without boring people with the data, we're essentially the same this year as we were last year. And that's looking at units, how many sides have closed. That's looking at volume, what's our closed volume, and that's looking at days on market. They're almost mirror images of each other. The one interesting fact is that units, if you get into the granular side of it, units are down about 3%. That's almost a margin of error, right? But volume is up over last year. So even with a fraction less sides, the sales prices are holding really steady. And I think that people don't get that. I think that we kind of operate in the real estate market, much as we do in life, with some confirmation bias. It should be worse off than it is because the rates are still, they've settled, but they're not exorbitantly low. They're also not exorbitantly high. And typically when you see rates in the 6 to 7%, you see prices start dropping. That's not happening because we still have limited inventory. So going forward, I think we're going to see a pickup going into next year, and that's in line with the National Association of Realtors predictions. They're predicting about 5.2 million in sides units nationally. I can't believe I'm going to go on record and say this, but in my humble opinion, which is not nearly as educated or have access to all the data that NAR does, I think we might see 5.5 pushing up to 5.7. So I think the inventory and the sales will pick up, but that's a healthy growth, right? Like if it does that, that's healthy. What scares us in the real estate world is the sharp increases and the sharp declines. If we come out next year, even if we hit 5.1, but if we get close to 5.5, man, that's a good stable growth. And I think that bodes well for both buyers and for sellers.
That's great. What do you think, I didn't tell you this one. Do you think there's any common misconceptions right now, either with buyers or sellers, people just paying attention to the market, or maybe even agents? Are you noticing any just common misconceptions?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's a great question, and I think there's a lot of that out there. So we'll start with agents first. I get the opportunity in my job to interview top agents literally every single day, multiple times a day. And it's fascinating to me because I can sit in a meeting with a top agent who is having their best year ever, who is growing their market share, who is very confident, and I can turn around, walk into the next meeting, and the sky is falling. I don't even know if I'm going to stay in real estate, right? Two broadly, vastly different perspectives. The meeting that I led yesterday, doing that statistical overview, the whole point of that conversation with a room of 100 realtors was to say, let's take out any emotion around what you feel and let's talk about what is actual. And the general consensus was there's enough opportunity for everybody. The question is, what agent is going to seize the opportunity? Equal opportunity, unequal reward based on diligence, work ethic, adaptability, all those things. So I think there's a variety of misconceptions inside the real estate industry relative to producers, real estate agents, brokerages in general. As far as buyers and sellers go, the national media is just never right on this. And that's, I'm not calling into question the veracity of media. What I am calling into question is you can't take a vast approach, a macro approach to the local housing market. And what holds true in Birmingham, Alabama may not hold true in Kenosha, Wisconsin. And it may not be the same as Nashville, Tennessee. It's very easy to hear the broad strokes and buy into something. I lived in Alaska for 20 years. 11 of those years I sold real estate. What happens on the East Coast is absolutely not what happens in Alaska. It's regional, it's local, and then it gets into hyper local micro markets. It's city by city, it's subdivision by subdivision, it's school district by school district. So I say all of that to say this: buyers today, I think, believe there are massive deals out there waiting to just send in this 20% low offer, and there's deals everywhere. And the data just doesn't show that. It's not there. Now, does a buyer have more negotiating power today than they did 3 years and 4 years and 5 years ago? 100%. But it's come back to balance, right? So the idea that I'm going to swoop in and pick up something for pennies on the dollar is just not true. Additionally, we have, when the economy changed, which I would say September-ish 2022, you heard a lot of prognosticators talking about foreclosures. There's going to be all these foreclosures. And we kept saying, I said it publicly, I said it on podcasts, I said it in my office, I said it to our agents, our leadership. Where does the data come that says that happens? Because the loans are good, the payments are reasonable because the interest rates were so low. And at this point, I think 0.4% of our market is what we would call REO, distressed property, bank-owned, foreclosures, short sales, auctions.
0.4%.
Yeah, 0.4%. So that's not there. If a buyer wants a deal, I'll tell you where they find a deal. You find a deal, and I don't mean to be negative, the deals are in estate sales. Because typically, not always, but typically, when someone has passed away and their executor of their estate, their family, has taken on the responsibility of moving the real estate, typically those homes are paid for or close to paid for. There's a strong equity position. There may be some work, as someone moved into elderly time, maybe they didn't keep up on deferred maintenance as much. And the estate doesn't want to continue to pay to maintain that property. They want to sell it. And of course, they want top value. But because of the strong equity position and the lack of emotional attachment, because the person that owns the house is no longer with us, that's where the deals are, quite frankly. You can find a little more movement there. So on the seller side of the equation, and this is not new to this specific time in the market, this is the way every time a market has risen and fallen and risen and fallen, the sellers are the last to believe that the value associated with their home is the highest historical value that's ever been attached to that property. The buyers move faster to lowball and the sellers move slower to accurate pricing.
That makes sense.
And so we're in that stage. I think we're in that stage right now where we're seeing sellers still thinking, I can get what I got in 2021. You may get real close to it. You may even get a price, but you're going to have concessions.
Yep.
There's going to be closing costs paid. Buyers are able to get a termite contract. They couldn't even get that before, a home warranty. So your net cost to sale, which isn't reflected in the data, is definitely more a coming to the middle than it is never having to give a thing, if that makes sense. So I think those would be the common misconceptions. I do think there's one other misconception out there, and that lies in the aftermath of the Sitzer-Burnett lawsuit. It got a lot of media play, for several weeks. And if you talk to Joe Q Public, he's going to say, yeah, nobody has to pay commissions anymore. Well, first of all, nobody ever had to pay them to begin with. Secondly, they were always negotiable. So nothing has changed. What has changed is that, to put it in one sentence, the compensation for both the buyer's representative and the seller's representative is negotiated on the contract in clear view of everyone. That's really what's changed. We weren't allowed really to negotiate that term inside a purchase agreement between a buyer and a seller. Well, now it's everybody gets to make those decisions together. I think that's healthy. I don't have a problem with it. But this idea that, no one's ever going to use a real estate agent again or have to pay them, that's like saying everybody is going to become an investor and trade freely on the market without any professional advice. Sure, some people do it. That's fine. I play around a little bit here and there. Probably have no business doing so. But I have a financial advisor and he's worth every penny. This is no different than that.
Very well said. I appreciate that. Last question. What do you see either for buyers or sellers? Do you see any particular opportunity right now that stands out the most?
Well, I'm going to go back to the estate conversation because I believe the statistic, and I may get this wrong, but the last that I heard, 70% of the real estate wealth was held by the boomer generation. And that generation is moving on to brighter days, shall we say, for them. Something has to happen. It's a transfer of wealth that's happening right now. And back to my point earlier, I do think as our population ages, we will see more and more of those estate sale properties, probate properties, things like that, where you do have an opportunity to get in and something maybe has been really well taken care of. I used to love that. Almost every time I would list a property from my, I would get referrals from my estate attorney contacts. They say, hey, we've got a property, we got to move. Almost every time, because that generation handled their business. Like just broad strokes. They took care of their things. They handled their business. Their mortgages were paid off. And while the decor may not be current, the home had good bones, right? So if a young family coming in can pick up a house that, let's get some sweat equity into it, let's do some upgrades over time, they're committed to the long-term real estate hold, they can really do well for themselves and their family in acquiring, in one sense, an asset that they can grow. In another sense, just a home, right? We got to live somewhere. And I think that opportunity, just based on the aging population, is something that's really a viable opportunity for the buyers. The other opportunity that we have right now, and I don't think even when it was happening, I don't think we talked enough about this. The reason the market got so challenging for buyers in 2020, 21, 22 was the entry. It had been happening, but it began to happen in full force late 2019 of the institutional buyer. And I can say, and you know this, you and I have been in the same market, the entire first-time home buyer property list was removed from the market by the institutional buyer. Real estate is all about the progression, the domino effect, right? First-time home buyer enters the market, they buy that affordable home. They grow a family, they buy the next home. Kids get bigger and taller and need more space, they buy the next home. Kids start going off to college, and it's this roller coaster, right? Well, if you eliminate the entire first step of the process, you've turned upside down the market. And so all of these first-time home, a VA buyer, an FHA buyer, they didn't stand a chance. Right? So we're back now, not to be, who knows what happens economically going forward. The institutional buyers are ramping back up. They're playing the game 6 months out. Will they come back in force like they did at that time? Maybe, maybe not. But I think the next 6 months is a really great time to buy real estate because right now you're not competing against the cash offer with no repairs that'll close in 2 days.
Yeah.
That's a ridiculous price that you can't blame a seller for maximizing their asset and taking
Sure.
that.
Yeah.
So there is a window right now. Now, it may last a long time, but it may not.
Mm-hmm.
So with reasonable rates, I would be looking at that point of entry as a buyer for sure. If I had my kid, my middle child just bought his first home. I don't think he could have bought at a better time. He got a 5.85% interest rate. He bought a townhome in Vestavia that's completely affordable for him, and he didn't compete with another offer.
Yeah.
He got his closing costs paid, and he has begun the journey. 3 years ago, he couldn't have done that.
No way.
He could not a
Yeah.
chance.
Yeah.
So I think that's a real opportunity zone that we need to be educating our buyers and our sellers who are deciding, do I list now or not, about.
That's awesome. That's great advice. I am inspired to go add a bunch of estate attorneys and probate attorneys to my contacts.
It was one of my best sources when I was selling real estate in another state of business. And even today, my real estate sales team, we have 3 properties from an estate attorney that we work very closely with. They're off market, by the way. A lot of times that stuff goes off market. So you have to have, if I'm a buyer and I'm looking for that opportunity that we just talked about, you need a professional real estate agent with great relationships with other real estate agents. That's the thing we can't put a price tag on, because I'll just, Sally Mae. And Sally Mae may have a great probate attorney that sends her deals. And because man, I'm going to call her once a month. What do you have coming? What's going on? Do I have a buyer for one of these properties?
Yeah.
That's a value that you cannot price tag.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's it.
Awesome.
I'm so thankful for your time. Thankful for who you are, and just
You're sweet.
to be a friend.
If my shoes match in the morning, it's a good day. Anything else is a win from there.
Thank you.
You're welcome.